Los Angeles, January 15th, 1947. The morning air was cool and thin, still damp from the night fog that rolled in off the Pacific. At the edge of a vacant lot in Leimert Park, a quiet neighborhood south of downtown, a woman pushed a stroller down a dirt path with her young daughter beside her. They were on their way to run errands. Just another morning in post-war Los Angeles. But then the mother froze. In the weeds ahead of her, something white caught the sunlight. It looked like a store mannequin, sliced in half. But when she looked closer, she realized it wasn't a mannequin. It was a woman who had been cut in two. And from that moment, the story of the Black Dahlia began. Before we get started, if you're into deep dive mysteries, unsolved cases, and cold trails that still burn with questions, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We've got more cases like this coming your way. When police arrived, the scene didn't make sense. The body had been cleaned, completely drained of blood. There was no sign of struggle, no footprints, no drag marks, nothing to suggest where she had been killed. Her body was laid out deliberately, as if arranged for display. The woman's mouth had been cut from ear to ear, carved into a frozen, macabre smile. Her name was Elizabeth Short. She was 22 years old, and within days, she became a national obsession, known to the world as the Black Dahlia. To understand what happened to her, we have to go back before the headlines, before the rumors, before the legend took on a life of its own. We have to meet the real Elizabeth Short, not the myth, not the Hollywood fantasy, but the girl who left home chasing a dream. She was born in Boston, Massachusetts, on July 29th, 1924. The world she entered was already heavy with uncertainty. The Great Depression was just around the corner. Her father, Cleo Short, built miniature golf courses. When the economy crashed, so did his business. One day, when Elizabeth was just 6 years old, Cleo's car was found abandoned near a bridge. Everyone assumed he had taken his own life, but he hadn't. Years later, Elizabeth's mother, Phoebe, would discover that her husband was very much alive, living in California under a new name. Elizabeth grew up believing her father was dead, that early abandonment, it would mark her for life. Her mother worked hard, raising 5 daughters alone in a small Massachusetts apartment. Elizabeth was the second oldest, and by all accounts, she was different, quiet but curious, dreamy but determined. She was obsessed with the movies, the glamorous actresses on the big screen, the way they carried themselves, the lights, the applause. She used to tell friends that one day she'd be the one people recognized. But the world she grew up in was harsh. The winters in Medford were cold, and the Short family didn't have much. Elizabeth struggled with asthma and chronic bronchitis, which often kept her home from school. Still, she carried herself with elegance, always dressed carefully, even when she didn't have much to wear. People remembered her as the girl who looked like she was meant for somewhere else. In her teenage years, Elizabeth's fascination with Hollywood only grew. She loved the idea of reinvention, that in California you could become someone new. When she turned 19, she left home. At first, she went to Florida, staying with relatives, working odd jobs and waiting tables. But California always called her back, because that's where her father had gone, and she wanted answers. In 1943, she took a train west, all the way to Vallejo, California, to reconnect with her father. But the reunion didn't go as planned. Cleo had built a new life for himself, a quiet one. He wasn't interested in revisiting the past. He offered her a place to stay, but their relationship was strained. After a few months, they argued, and Elizabeth left. She was on her own again. The 1940s were a strange time in Los Angeles. The war had just ended. Soldiers were coming home. The city was alive with promise and danger. Hollywood was booming. But beneath the glamour, there was desperation. Thousands of young women arrived every year, hoping to be discovered. Most weren't. Elizabeth became one of them. She floated through the city, waitressing, staying in cheap hotels, sometimes living with friends or brief acquaintances. She was beautiful, magnetic, and mysterious. But she was also broke, and the city could be cruel to a woman without means. Friends describe her as polite but guarded. She told stories about movie auditions, about modeling jobs that never quite happened. Sometimes she'd change details about her life, saying she'd been in films or that she dated important men. No one could tell what was true and what was just hope reshaped into memory. But through it all, Elizabeth carried herself like a star. Black hair, porcelain skin, bright red lips. She turned heads everywhere she went. Men adored her. Women envied her. And in a city built on illusion, she became one. Over the next few years, she drifted through California, Santa Barbara, San Diego, Los Angeles. She had brushes with the law, mostly for underage drinking or curfew violations. She dated servicemen pilots, men who promised her stability. But none of them lasted, and as her dreams began to fade, the darkness of the city seemed to close in. By the end of 1946, Elizabeth Short was 22 years old, alone, broke, and searching for her next chance. She was last seen alive on the night of January 9th, 1947. 6 days later, her body would be found in that empty lot. Before we reach that moment, before we uncover the horror that made her name immortal, we need to understand the woman she was, the places she walked, and the shadows that followed her. Because the story of the Black Dahlia isn't just about a murder. It's about a dream that Hollywood promised, and the nightmare delivered. When Elizabeth left home, she wasn't running away. She was running towards something, a version of herself she could believe in. But every train ride west was also a journey away from safety, from family, from the life she once knew, and the world she entered. The post-war years of America wasn't kind to dreamers. It was the 1940s. The war was ending, and cities like Los Angeles and San Diego were swelling with new faces. Servicemen returning from overseas, women seeking jobs, families rebuilding their lives. Elizabeth fit into none of them completely. She wasn't a soldier's sweetheart or a homemaker waiting for a husband. She was a girl who wanted something bigger, independence, glamour, recognition. But that hunger came at a cost. When she arrived in Vallejo, California, to live with her father, it was supposed to be a new beginning. But Cleo Short had his own demons. He was stern, emotionally distant, a man who had faked his own death and abandoned his family. Now, years later, he wasn't ready to play father again. Elizabeth tried to make it work. She cooked, cleaned, tried to earn her keep. But the tension grew. He criticized her for being lazy, for chasing pipe dreams. He told her she needed discipline. One day, after an argument that turned ugly, Elizabeth packed her things and left. She would never see her father again. She went south to Santa Barbara, a beautiful, coastal city with Spanish-style streets and beaches that glowed gold in the late afternoon. There, she tried to start over. But life had other plans. In 1943, at just 19 years old, Elizabeth was arrested for underage drinking. Her mugshot, taken that night, is one of the last clear images we have of her before she became the Black Dahlia. Her face is calm, almost defiant, dark curls framing her pale face, eyes fixed straight into the camera. It's haunting because no one looking at that picture could have imagined what would come just 4 years later. After her arrest, she was sent back to Massachusetts to live with her mother for a short time. But her restlessness, her need to move, never left her, so she left again. This time, she drifted from city to city, Miami, Chicago, Long Beach, San Diego. Everywhere she went, she made an impression. Everywhere she went, she reinvented herself a little more. She started using the name Beth. Sometimes Bet, sometimes Liz. She changed her hair, her story, her circle of friends. It wasn't deception, it was survival. During the war, Elizabeth gravitated toward military men, pilots, lieutenants, officers who could offer her a taste of the glamour and excitement she craved. One in particular would shape her story. His name was Major Matthew Gordon, Jr. He was a decorated Army Air Force officer. Confident, charming, everything Elizabeth dreamed of. They met while he was stationed in California, and for a time, they wrote to each other constantly. When he returned overseas, Elizabeth told friends she was engaged to him. She even showed off the letters he sent, full of warmth, longing, and promises of marriage when he came home. But Matthew Gordon never came home. His plane crashed in India in 1945, just days before Japan's surrender. Elizabeth was devastated. Friends said she wore black for weeks. Others said she talked about him as if he were still alive, like she couldn't bear to let go. Whether or not they were truly engaged, one thing was clear. Something inside her broke after that. After Matthew's death, Elizabeth's life drifted again, from one city to another, one temporary job to the next. She worked as a waitress, a cashier, and a movie usher. Sometimes she stayed with friends. Sometimes with men who offered her a room for a few weeks. Sometimes she just disappeared for a while, then showed up somewhere new, smiling like nothing had happened. But under that smile, the world was catching up to her. By 1946, Elizabeth was living in Southern California again, bouncing between Los Angeles and San Diego. She loved the nightlife, the music, the laughter, the sense that she was part of something bigger. She wasn't a party girl in a reckless sense. She didn't drink heavily or use drugs, but she was social. She liked attention. She liked the idea of being seen, and that made her stand out. Men noticed her. She had a distinctive look. Jet black hair styled in waves, striking contrast to her pale skin. She always wore black dresses or white blouses with tailored skirts. People said she looked like she stepped out of a movie, but her beauty also made her a target. Some men were kind, others weren't. And Elizabeth, always polite, rarely said no. Not because she wanted to please them, but because she didn't want trouble. She knew how quickly rejection could turn dangerous for a woman alone in Los Angeles. So she smiled. She was charmed, and when she could, she disappeared quietly before the night turned sour. Those who knew her said she was always on the move, living out of suitcases, staying in cheap apartments or borrowed rooms. She was never anywhere long enough to build roots. But she dreamed big. She wanted to act, to model, to be somebody. In Hollywood, everyone did. But few realized that Hollywood's golden glow was often just a reflection, light bouncing off. Something dark underneath. By December 1946, Elizabeth was in Los Angeles again. She was broke, looking for work, and staying in various hotels and rooming houses downtown. She spent her days wandering, making calls, and visiting cafes. She was seen in Biltmore hotel lobbies, in diners and department stores, always dressed well, always polite. But no one could say exactly what she was doing or who she was seeing. Then, on January 9th, 1947, witnesses saw her at the Biltmore Hotel near Pershing Square, waiting for someone. She'd been dropped off there by a man she'd been dating, Red Manley, a traveling salesman. Manley told police later that Elizabeth said she was meeting her sister. He waited, but she insisted she'd be fine. That was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. 6 days later, her body was found in an empty lot on Norton Avenue, clean, posed, and mutilated beyond comprehension. And just like that, the young woman who wanted to be famous was known across the world. But for reasons darker than anyone could have imagined, before the city could even grieve, the headlines were already calling her the Black Dahlia. They turned her death into a spectacle, her story into a myth. And somewhere out there, her killer was watching unfold. In the next chapter, we step into the investigation itself, the discovery, the chaos, and the first clues that would lead detectives down a maze with no end. Because what happened next wasn't just a murder investigation. It was the birth of a Hollywood nightmare. It was just after 10 a.m. on January 15th, 1947. Los Angeles was waking up, the city rumbling with traffic, radio jingles, and the smell of morning coffee. But on a dusty lot at 39th and Norton Avenue, the world was about to stop. A young mother named Betty Berzinger was walking with her 3-year-old daughter. She glanced across the weeds and frozen dirt and saw something lying in the grass. It looked like a mannequin, split perfectly in two. She stepped closer, and then she saw the blood. She ran, grabbing her daughter, screaming for help. Within minutes, police cruisers rolled up the dirt road, tires crunching on gravel, their sirens cutting through the morning air. Detectives from the South Los Angeles Division arrived first. They expected another body dump, the kind that came with the city's growing crime problem. But what they found was nothing they had ever seen before. The victim was a woman, naked, severed cleanly at the waist. Her body had been washed, drained of blood, and posed. Her arms stretched above her head, her legs apart. A deep slice ran from the corners of her mouth up toward each ear, frozen into a gruesome, mocking grin. No blood at the scene. No fingerprints. No struggle. Whoever killed her had done it somewhere else. Within minutes, word spread. And by the time the coroner's wagon arrived, the curious and the bold had gathered behind police tape. Reporters, photographers, and bystanders craning their necks for a glimpse. Los Angeles had seen murders before, but nothing like this. To the police, it looked almost surgical, the work of someone who understood anatomy. The cut that separated her body had been made with precision, likely after death. One detective whispered, "It looks like a surgeon did it." The body was taken to the Los Angeles County morgue, where fingerprints would eventually reveal her identity. Elizabeth Short, a 22-year-old woman, last seen a week earlier at the Biltmore Hotel. The press caught wind of it almost instantly, and within hours the name Black Dahlia hit the front pages, borrowed from a recent film called The Black Dahlia, twisted into something darker. It was catchy, sensational, and cruel. The media frenzy was immediate. Reporters swarmed the morgue, the police station, even Elizabeth's old boarding houses. Photographers bribed officers for access to evidence photos. Columnists speculated about who she was: an actress, a runaway, a prostitute, a spy. And as the story grew, so did the lies. In the 1940s, Los Angeles newspapers were locked in a brutal competition. Every gruesome detail sold papers, and the Black Dahlia was front-page gold. The Los Angeles Examiner even contacted Elizabeth's mother in Massachusetts, pretending her daughter had won a beauty contest just to get personal information before breaking the truth. They told her after the interview that her daughter was dead. By the time the real story reached the public, Elizabeth Short was no longer a person. She was an image, a myth, a name wrapped in fear and fascination, and the police were under immense pressure to deliver results. Lead Detective Harry Hansen described the case as the most brutal crime I have ever seen. Dozens of officers were assigned to canvass the city. They questioned bartenders, hotel clerks, cab drivers, soldiers, and anyone who had seen a woman matching Elizabeth's description. But the trail was cold before it began. No weapon, no clear motive, and too many rumors. Then, a few days after the murder hit the papers, the first clue arrived, literally. A package appeared at the office of the Los Angeles Examiner. Inside was a collection of personal items: Elizabeth's birth certificate, business cards, photographs, and an address book. The package was carefully cleaned with gasoline, wiped free of fingerprints. A note was included, cut from newspaper letters, reading, "Here is Dahlia's belongings. Letter to follow." The handwriting and the deliberate cleaning suggested intelligence. Control. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a performance. Police believed the killer was watching the coverage and wanted to play a game, to taunt them. Over the following weeks, more letters appeared, each cryptic and mocking. Some signed simply, "The Black Dahlia Avenger." But every lead brought more confusion. One letter claimed responsibility, only to contradict itself. One suspect confessed, only to retract it days later. By February, the LAPD had more than 150 confessions, and not a single one held up. The autopsy revealed horrifying details. She'd been tortured for hours before death. Her body showed signs of restraint. Cuts and bruises mapped across her skin like the killer had taken his time. But the cause of death wasn't the mutilation. It was hemorrhage and shock from blunt force trauma to the head. Whoever killed Elizabeth Short wanted her to suffer. Investigators searched for connections, doctors, surgeons, anyone with the skill to dissect a body so cleanly. They combed through hospital records, questioned medical students, even ex-soldiers trained as field medics. Nothing fit. And as days turned into weeks, the public's fascination began to twist into hysteria. Women across Los Angeles started seeing danger everywhere. Parents warned their daughters not to go out alone. The city's underbelly, the motels, the bars, the men who lingered in shadows, suddenly looked different. The Black Dahlia wasn't just a murder victim anymore. She had become a symbol of every dark thing hiding behind the city's golden facade. In death, Elizabeth Short became the mirror Los Angeles couldn't look away from. A city built on dreams now faced its own reflection, cracked, bloodstained, and unsolved. And somewhere out there, her killer was still free, watching, maybe even smiling at the chaos he'd created. The murder of Elizabeth Short gripped Los Angeles in fear, but inside the precinct walls, it was something else: frustration. The case was drowning in tips, false leads, and a public hungry for answers. Detectives Harry Hansen and Finus Brown, two of the LAPD's best, worked around clock, sleeping in shifts. Every day, new letters arrived. Every day, new confessions poured in. But every trail went cold. The letters from the so-called Black Dahlia Avenger kept the pressure on. The handwriting was erratic, childish, but deliberate. Each word was cut from newspapers. And always there was that same tone, smug, teasing, confident. He wrote that he wanted to turn himself in, but then mocked the police for being too slow to catch him. He promised another murder, another victim, but none came. It was as if the killer had vanished into the city, or worse, was right there in plain sight. The coroner's report gave detectives one faint lead. The precision of the body's dissection suggested medical training. The cut that separated her torso was a hemicorporectomy, a procedure taught in medical schools to prevent bleeding after death. It required skill and composure. The killer wasn't just cruel. He was methodical. The LAPD began questioning every doctor, surgeon, and medical student with record violence or mental illness. One name stood out: Dr. George Hodel, a wealthy physician who lived in a sprawling mansion in the Hollywood Hills. Known for his arrogance, his strange parties, and his fascination with art and death. But in 1947, the police didn't have enough evidence to connect him. Not yet. Years later, we'd learned that the LAPD secretly bugged Hodel's home. And on those tapes, he said something chilling. "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary because she's dead." The case against Hodel would resurface decades later. But in 1947, those words were still years away. For now, the detectives were blind. Other suspects emerged: a sailor, a nightclub owner, a former lover, even a mortician. Each seemed plausible for a moment, until the evidence fell apart. The LAPD even looked into Mark Hansen, the nightclub manager who'd known Elizabeth personally. She had stayed in one of his boarding houses for a time. Some said he was obsessed with her. Others said he tried to help her. When questioned, Hansen denied everything, and without proof, they had to let him go. Meanwhile, the press coverage was relentless. The Los Angeles Examiner painted Elizabeth as a mysterious femme fatale, the Black Dahlia, a girl drawn to danger and deceit. But those who knew her said otherwise. Elizabeth was a seductress or a criminal. She was shy, polite, a young woman who wanted to act in movies, who dreamed of stardom in a city built on illusions. The papers needed a story. They made her one. The truth was simple and tragic. Elizabeth Short wasn't a legend. She was just a girl. And Los Angeles, the place that promised her everything, had swallowed her whole. By March 1947, the investigation had stalled. Leads dried up. Witnesses recanted. Even the FBI, who'd been assisting, turned their attention elsewhere. The Black Dahlia case drifted into silence, unsolved, unanswered, and officially cold. But it never really died, because something about it stuck. The perfect staging, the surgical precision, the strange calmness of the killer. And as the years went on, detectives, both official and amateur, began asking a different question. What if Elizabeth Short's murder wasn't random? What if it was part of something larger? Some believed the killer was connected to Hollywood, a producer perhaps, or a studio doctor. Others pointed to police corruption, claiming the investigation was deliberately sabotaged. And then there were the copycats, people drawn to the crime's infamy, eager to insert themselves into history. By the time the 1950s rolled in, the Black Dahlia had become something else entirely, a ghost story told under neon lights. Elizabeth Short was laid to rest in Medford, Massachusetts, beside her family. Her mother visited the grave every year. And though her story became legend, the woman herself, her voice, her laughter, her small kindnesses were lost to time. But the case refused to fade. Next time, we step into the maze, a web of lies, obsession, and darkness that still grips Los Angeles to this day. Because to understand who killed Elizabeth Short, you first have to understand why.